Change can't live with it, but you won't succeed without it. Business owners often resist change and prefer to stick with what has worked for them in the past. And there is logic in relying on what's been successful historically and having consistency. It's beneficial in many circumstances. But there are times when businesses must adapt to changes imposed by outside forces, shifting customer preferences, and other outside factors. So this course will help participants understand behavioral economics concepts behind why people fear change, how to reframe change-induced challenges as opportunities instead, and learn how to develop strategies for successful change that will advance your business. The course utilizes concepts from the field of behavioral economics, which is the subdiscipline of economics that looks at how people actually behave, as opposed to rational actor theories that focus on how people should behave in an ideal set of circumstances. Basic research in psychology and behavioral economics shows that people adopt sensible rules of thumb, also called heuristics. And these are ways that we make decisions more easily. We're all faced with too many decisions to make on a daily basis and too many things to think about. We cannot think about all of them. So we make some decisions really on autopilot, kind of in the back of our brain while we're doing other things. We do things sort of automatically. And these automatic things are called heuristics. So let's look at an example. What happens if you move your trash can from one side of your desk to another? Sounds simple, right? You move it and it takes 2 weeks to adapt to something this simple as moving your trash can from one side of your desk to another. Your autopilot brain will still try to expend as little energy as possible on throwing out a piece of trash and other mundane tasks. So you'll find that you automatically try to throw your trash where your trash can used to be. And it takes you time for your brain and the autopilot to get used to, oh, the trash can's no longer on the left side, now it's on the right side. This is an example of how difficult it is to adapt to change. And this is a simple thing. So it's easy to think about why bigger and more important changes are difficult. There are other reasons why change is so hard. Fear is the first one. People are fearful of potential negative impacts. Fear in this case arises out of a basic human heuristic called loss aversion. People hate losing something that they have. Losing something makes people twice as unhappy as the happiness they experienced when they first obtained that thing. Sometimes fear of loss can cause us to act irrationally, holding on to things far longer than makes sense logically. Loss aversion contributes to another human behavior called status quo bias. People have a tendency to want to maintain their current situation, whatever it is. For example, let's just talk about older technology versus new technology. For many, many years, I had a cell phone and a landline telephone. After I got a cell phone plan with unlimited calling for a reasonable price, I rarely used the landline, but it still took me a long time to make a decision to cancel the landline. On the other hand, younger people who never relied on landlines had no problem at all not having a landline. Cell phones were their status quo. You see the same debate with cable or satellite TV, with younger people being on average much more comfortable using computers, tablets, and smartphones to stream movies and television shows and music and cut the cable. This is status quo bias on a small scale. The next heuristic I want to talk about is ownership bias. People become attached to the things they have. The more work they put into something, the more ownership they begin to feel for it. The ownership bias heuristic. Ownership bias is sometimes referred to tongue-in-cheek as the IKEA effect, because pride of ownership is proportional to the work invested. For example, in assembling furniture. Imagine how much ownership you feel about your company after all the work you've put into building it. Imagine your ownership bias for the ways in which you've always done things. People can begin to feel ownership of something before they actually own it. This is called the virtual ownership bias heuristic. You can see this virtual ownership at work at an auction where bidders begin to imagine themselves as the owner of the item they're bidding on. The longer they're engaged in the bidding, the more they imagine themselves owning the item, and the more intensely they feel about bidding on it. We even call the successful bidder the winner, even though really all they've won is the right to pay for the item that is being auctioned. Virtual ownership also translates to people's feelings about ideas, and from there, resistance to any new ideas. And your employees, your vendors, and your customers have virtual ownership of the way your business has worked in the past. So how do you fix this? You have to engage your team and your customers in talking about change. It's easy to want to avoid the unpleasantness of stakeholder input and wait until a plan for change is ready and all the decisions have been made. But you'll be disappointed when you get a less than positive reception from some stakeholders. So you should start engagement early. You want to start working with employees, vendors, and customers before negative opinions about a change solidify. You want to get input before the plan or proposal is finalized. Virtual ownership bias can work in your favor when people begin to feel ownership of the process. And you can see positive peer pressure working with your engaged employees working towards solving a problem. You also want to identify in advance the issues that are most likely to trigger loss aversion and ownership bias. You want to prepare information that will assist participants in understanding what will be gained by potential changes. Here's an example. I'm going to ask you to read two different alternatives for a program, Proposal A and Proposal B. Just take a moment, read the two, and then jot down which one you prefer. Okay, I'm going to assume everybody's had a chance to do that. Now, I want you to take a look at a different program, Program 2, with Proposal C and Proposal D. So take another moment, read both of these, and jot down which one do you think is preferable? Which one would you choose? Okay, so let's talk about these different choices. In reality, statistically speaking, All four of these are the same. And it's important to understand that when it's framed as savings, people are averse to risk. When it's framed as a loss, people are accepting of risk. Let's look at the examples again. So with program 1, proposal A is talking about savings and certainty versus risk. So people in general trend towards proposal A in this framing. In the other program, it's framed as a loss. And in that situation, people are more likely to choose the one that is not a certain loss, even though, again, statistically, these are equal. So remember this, when you're framing a presentation, if you talk about savings, people will be averse to the riskier option. If you talk about losses, people will be more accepting of risk. Now, we also tend to reject sometimes very reasonable proposals for change. Why is that? This happens because of loss aversion and people valuing the things they have more than the things that someone else has. Once a person has a particular object, they don't want to give it up. But if they don't already have that same object, they do not necessarily feel the need to obtain it. This bias is true to such an extent that losing something makes people approximately twice as unhappy as the happiness they experienced when they first obtained that same thing. So if we apply this to your business situation, if customers or employees perceive that a proposed plan or project will cause a loss, the mitigation, the change, has to be significantly more valuable than what is perceived as the loss. There's also a situation with perceived fairness and adapting to change. People care about fairness. They care about it so much that they will decline an offer of free money if they feel the offer is unfair. And this has been demonstrated through behavioral economics experiments such as the ultimatum game. In this game, one participant, the proposer, selects, the proposer will receive a portion of $10 if he or she is able to get acceptance of an offer to the other participant, the responder. In other words, they're going to divide up the $10. The proposer selects the amount to be offered. The responder must either accept or reject their offer. There is no other communication allowed. It's a one-time offer, acceptance, or rejection. What's interesting is that, in theory, the responder should accept any offer more than 0, because otherwise they get nothing. But in practice, responders are influenced by the feeling of fairness, and they reject offers they deem to be too low or not fair. So how do we address this? The new proposal has to be at least twice as good as the status quo for people to view it as being equal to what you're currently doing. So you have to think about all of the advantages and present all of the advantages of the change. You can grandfather in people with current access to an amenity or a preferential cost structure. And you can frame proposals to illustrate value and fairness. All right, so sometimes, often, stakeholders choose the short-term solution and ignore a better longer-term solution. And this is because immediate and delayed rewards stimulate different areas of the brain. Immediate rewards trigger the emotional part of the brain, while delayed rewards trigger the reason portion of your brain. Emotions related to short-term rewards win out disproportionately to reason. So for example, if you ask people who are not already committed to a regular exercise activity whether they want to be healthy, they will say yes. That's a long-term goal. But if you ask them to pick an activity to do today and also pick an activity for next week, they will choose to plan to exercise next week, and they will choose the immediate gratification of watching television or shopping today. So imagine how hard it is for customers or employees to select the best long-term plan that deals with issues that are weeks, months, maybe years in the future. You, as the business owner, have to think about this for the long-term health of your business. A study by neuroscientists showed how you can address this by helping people imagine specific, desired future outcomes that are tied to their goals. Participants are asked to visualize receipt of future rewards, and then they are much less likely to choose the short-term reward over the long-term goals and rewards. This works because when people imagined personally relevant future events, brain areas associated with long-term memory were activated, in addition to the brain areas associated with decision-making and predictions. So it has to be relevant, and it has to be something people can visualize. Now I'd like to talk about a couple of case studies about entrepreneurs who founded businesses and had achieved some success. They were able to adapt to changing circumstances and succeed even more. The first case study I'll share is a company called Sweeten. Sweeten, as in Home Sweet Home, was launched in 2011 by Jean Brownhill. Her own challenging home renovation inspired her to change the construction industry and create renovation experiences that are more transparent, more efficient, and more personal. Jean's idea brings trust, transparency, and technology into this process, creating a start-to-finish high standard for the experience of those who are having a renovation done. Sweeten has been called a renovation game changer, with Jean hailed as the contractor whisperer by New York Magazine and one of Inc. magazine's most innovative women founders in America. Before COVID, Jean had an online platform for selling, but an on-site in-person delivery, which is required for construction projects. The early days of COVID last year meant a 90% revenue drop for her business. She had to make big changes quickly. She had to do some layoffs. She downsized office space. She instituted remote work for her core team. She also communicated with both her clients, potential clients, and with contractors who she works with important messages about COVID safety while working in person in someone's home or office, alternative ways to accomplish some tasks such as virtual walkthroughs rather than in-person walkthroughs to get construction bids, to cut down on the number of people going through in person. She communicated how to have someone working in your home safely. She also saw a trend for virtual workers and people moving from the two coasts and really big cities to mid-size and smaller cities. which also was paired with a trend of work from home for knowledge workers because they wanted better home offices and were converting basements, attics, garages, etc. into home offices. So she expanded to additional cities. She also launched Sweeten Accelerates Women, SAW, very clever, USA. It's a virtual platform to help women contractors accelerate their businesses. Jean changed her business strategy to largely remote work. Instead of physical offices in 2 cities, she now has 10 with more remote virtual offices. She cut overhead costs in half and was able to lower her fees, which also helped expand business. And she does much less expensive business travel. She does much less business travel, saving a lot of money. And she does not expect to change this back after the pandemic. Jean says you have to be flexible and you cannot let change stop you or knock you down. You just have to stand back up. The second case study I'd like to talk about is the Silver Room, a small boutique retail store on the south side of Chicago, founded in 1997. This small retail store survived the COVID pandemic and the summer of 2020 with protests, looting, and other challenges in Chicago. Let's talk about how the founder, Eric Williams, dealt with change. He remodeled his retail store in the middle of the pandemic. It was something that he had wanted to do, but couldn't afford the time having his store closed. So while it had to be closed anyway, he did this remodel. He planned the remodel with a purpose. The display cases down the center of the store can be rolled out of the way to make room for special events that are a big part of his business model. This looks very sleek, but these are actually simple, relatively inexpensive materials. His store had always been a hub of the neighborhood, the physical retail store. So he tried to figure out during COVID, how could he still be a hub of the neighborhood in the community? He expanded his online presence. He linked it to community initiatives and resources, such as how to apply for grants or how to access food resources. And he had online weekly check-ins available to anyone in the community who wanted to join online. While he had people online, they also had access to his new online store that he added. He did not have a proper online store before. He just had a few items sort of shown that people could buy, but it wasn't set up as an online store. So he made the investment to have a real online store with e-commerce. He added books to his offerings because people wanted books. He added free local delivery by partnering with some local delivery services, and he got a grant to pay for the delivery services. His changes resulted in the second half of 2020 being his best 6 months ever. There are probably few retail stores that can say that. His new product line, books, he sold over 2,000 books, and customers responded really well to the changes. Eric Williams said, "We were selling jewelry and music, but people wanted books during the pandemic. Okay, so we'll sell books. It gets people on our website and in our store, then they'll buy other things in addition." The key is it's all done within the Silver Room's brand, their approach to what they offer, their unique way of engaging in the community. So I'd like to now give you a checklist for change. First, plan carefully. In the case studies we looked at, both Jean and Eric relied on their key people. Who that is for your business will depend on the type of business you have and the type of change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating. For Eric Williams of the Silver Room, it was his store manager and his online/social media director. You want to work through creating change that you're contemplating.